Hello everybody, this is Bird Brain, where here we are, nerdy for the birdies. So, the Eagles have just today finished their OTA period. They'll now be off until training camp, so from now until basically training camp, I plan to kind of do content on a bi-weekly schedule. So today we're going to talk about, just some rumors and stuff like that we've heard about players on the market, players that have been cut, players that could be traded. Would these players fit positions of need for the Eagles? Should the Eagles pursue them? So I basically have three different groups of players. I have players I think the Eagles should be interested in acquiring if they truly need them. Then I have a group of, the situation would really depend on how the player feels, and it's a little more of a maybe gray area. And then the third is an absolute hard no. So we're going to actually work with the no's first and work our way up, So the first player, in my opinion, that I don't think the Eagles in this case should trade for is Jalen Ramsey. In fact, all three of these players are no's in terms of trading. Jalen Ramsey, for a couple of reasons why. Number one, he's obviously going to have a pricey contract you're going to have to pick up. And the big thing with my nose is a lot of it starts first with money. The Eagles traded C.J. Gardner-Johnson this offseason. They've talked all offseason about how much they are trying to put aside cash, put aside cap, to be able to pay some bigger contracts down the road, i.e. Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, just to name a few, right? So I don't think they are looking to pay big money long-term to anybody. And I think Ramsey is one of those guys that's going to have to be paid a good amount of money. But besides that, I think it's also just a culture fit. He was part of that group in Miami that frankly did not like Fangio. They were all telling him to kick rocks and whatnot, and I just don't see him coming here and falling into line with that. And again, I just don't think it's a good fit. I just think it's too noisy. I think it's too much for this team right now. He'd be a great addition in terms of just pure skill, but again, you do have to think about trying to keep this team focused. It's not just about gathering star talent, it's about gathering the right guys and building the roster out that way. And my next player that is a no for me is Kyle Pitts, and this one is one that I've seen people do mock trades for the Eagles to get him. And I understand the player because, people are looking at the tight end position. People talk about depth behind Goddard. Goddard doesn't always stay healthy. And the big thing, too, about tight end is the Eagles, none of their tight ends are under contract beyond this year. So their room is going to pretty much be loaded with free agents, and it's going to be hard to sign everybody back. So they're going to need somebody here. And that's exactly why I don't really want to trade for Pitts. He has only got one more year in his deal, I believe, so then you're going to have to turn around and pay him. And it's like, if you're not paying Dallas Goedert, why would you pay Kyle Pitts? And I know there's a difference of age, but it's not like Kyle Pitts has been uber productive in his career. Yes, he has a 1,000-yard season under his name, but other than that, it's been fairly pedestrian numbers the last few years. He's had 10 career touchdowns. It's just, I don't know. I just don't think it's worth giving up a mid-round pick to take Kyle Pitts and turn around and then hand him a contract for a player that, frankly, is just a better version of what we already have in Grant. And Grant will cost a significant less amount. I'd rather keep Calcaterra, sign him to a little extension next year just to stabilize the room, than trade for Kyle Pitts, who's better but does basically the same things. Kyle Pitts isn't a good blocker. There's a reason why guys like Jonnu Smith and even last year Charlie Warner were outsnapping Kyle Pitts, because they were better blockers for an offense that runs the ball a lot. What is the Eagles' offense? An offense that runs the ball a lot. So we had problems with tight ends blocking last year, and I don't think Kyle Pitts really solves that issue. So that's why I would pass. And the last player I'm going to name is Trey Hendrickson. Now, Trey Hendrickson's a great guy, great player, an amazing talent. He was the NFL sack leader. I just don't think it's in the Eagles' cards to be able to afford to get him. He's strictly a money thing. I think he wants to be paid somewhere in the 30s to mid-30s, even higher than that. He is one of the best pass rushers in this league. And that's what the going rate is right now. We just saw this offseason, Myles Garrett got $40 million. So he at least is going to command 35 plus. You know, he wants to be in that conversation. Now, he is older, like he's 30, and, you know, Howie Roseman didn't pay Reddick, who was coming off of an 11-sack season, who was also the same age. So that tells you all. I mean, maybe Reddick's more of a culture thing there too. I just don't know. That's why I would kind of just pass on Trey Hendrickson. It sounds cool, but I just think that, especially knowing what he wants to be paid, you know, knowing you're going to pay Jalen Carter, especially in a year, I just don't think it's a good use of the money right there, personally. So now we move to my maybe tier, where I have two players, one a recent add to this list, and one that's been discussed pretty much this entire offseason. Now, who knows if he's actually on the trade block or not? We don't know. But the first one is Trayvon Walker, the edge rusher from Jacksonville, and a lot of people have talked about trading for him. I think a lot of Eagles fans want to, and I'm kind of in the maybe group, because there are some pluses. Number one, you do have, if you trade for him, 2 years of contract control, because he has his 5th-year option selected. So you would get this year on his rookie deal, and then next year, which I believe is around $15 million is the number I've heard, I haven't looked, which is pretty cheap for someone in his position, and then you'd have to extend him. I just don't know if they would extend him when you have Nolan Smith, who's going to command probably around $20 million, knowing how good Nolan is at this point in time. Like, I figured he'd sign a contract similar to what Sweat signed, maybe a little more because he's younger. I just don't see them paying Trayvon Walker, who gets, you know, who's been a lot better than I think people think he's been. I think his contract's going to be somewhere between 25 to 30, and I just don't know if the Eagles will pay that. So it's a question. If he's in the situation where he's willing to play for 2 years, knowing full well the Eagles won't sign him, and he can hit free agency and play with his Georgia brothers again, then I would do it. But that's if you really understand what that deal exactly is. And then you have Jair Alexander, the corner, or former corner, I should say, from the Packers. Now, there are some good and bad things with Jair Alexander, who recently got released. You know, with the Eagles corner situation, a lot of people, you know, are worried about it. I don't think the Eagles necessarily need to make a move at really any spot right this second, but I do think that they should, you know, monitor the market a little bit just to make sure, hey, if we're not getting enough out of both Keely Ringo and Adoree Jackson, then we need to get somebody better. If we're not getting enough out of our edge rusher room, we'll look for somebody else on the market. If we, you know, tight end room, safety room, whatever, you know. And with Jair, when healthy, he's a very good corner. The question is when healthy, and he's had a lot of injury-plagued seasons. But the reason why I would be intrigued by signing him is I don't think he's going to get the contract, especially at this point, on the open market that other teams would get. I think Jair Alexander today, if he is signed by a team, would sign something that's very incentive-laden. When healthy, again, we know he's one of the best corners in the league, but he's missed a lot of games the last couple of years with injury, like significant amount of time. And I don't think a team's going to be, you know, thinking about taking that kind of a risk on him. Again, great player, but the injury is a concern. But if the Eagles can sign him, and let's say they need the help, and they can sign him to a cheap, you know, or maybe not necessarily cheap, but an incentive-laden contract where it's based on playing time and stats, then I think then, in that case, I would make the move. But again, you have to hit certain stipulations. So my last tier of guys are guys that I would consider the Eagles signing, and if they especially needed help at these positions, I could see them going after them. And the first of which is a player that a lot of people have linked to Philly, is Michael Mayer, the tight end from the Raiders. He is a second-round pick that has been solid in his career. He just hasn't really been needed, especially after last year with the drafting of Brock Bowers. He's a very good piece of their offense. He's just not a huge piece of it. You know, the year before, they had Devontae Adams, and they had Jacoby Myers. They had other guys ahead of him, but he still put up, you know, solid stats as a tight end. He just wasn't a huge piece of the offense. I think he could come as a tight end too. He's got good blocking ability. He's kind of a do-it-all type, and I don't think he'd be very expensive. And knowing how much draft capital you have, you could flip a day 3 pick for him. and he's somebody that, you know, wouldn't need a contract immediately. You can have him for 2 years under contract control for your team, and you'd be solid. And then you can let him walk in free agency to collect more money elsewhere once you stabilize the tight end room with draft picks. But it would be a good kind of changing of the guard player, because it's not likely the Eagles are going to re-sign Goddard, and, you know, we just don't know what the future plan for them is. Next, you have Justin Simmons, probably the most linked player to the Eagles this offseason. He himself has said and expressed interest in playing here, and I think it's a deal that makes sense in August. That we'll see what happens with the safety rotation. If they're kind of looking at it and everyone feels kind of samey, not really standing out, not really doing enough in their eyes, I could see them just bringing in Simmons, who knows this defense because he played for Vic for several years with the Broncos. So I think it would be perfect. I think it's just a matter of just, you know, evaluating. Every position's being evaluated. We haven't really seen much of anything yet. So for that reason, I would be interested in Simmons. And I don't think Simmons would cost you a ton. I don't see him signing a significant contract or deal. I forget what he signed last year for Atlanta, but I don't think it was really a ton of money. The Eagles do have the space this year to pick up the tab for a guy like Simmons. And the last player I'm going to name is a player reunion for Philadelphia, and it's the cornerback Rasul Douglas. So again, in the situation, if the Eagles are uncomfortable with their cornerback room, a guy I would look at is Rasul Douglas. And I know fans who were around when Rasul Douglas was on the team aren't the biggest fans of him because he struggled. But if you look the last few years, he's done really well in zone-heavy schemes, and that's kind of what the Eagles play defensively. And I think he would fit this scheme a lot better, especially based on his time with the Packers. So, for that reason, I think I could see him coming back here, having interest. I mean, we'll see what his contract would look like, but I think he's a solid option that if you're not happy with your cornerback room depth, he's someone you can bring in, and you'd feel very comfortable putting opposite of Quinyon Mitchell and playing for this team. So anyway, that is my list of players the Eagles could go after, shouldn't go after, maybe could go after. Like I said, I don't expect the Eagles to make any moves anytime soon. The roster currently at this point in time is full, but if they're kind of thinking about things, trying to find ways to make their roster a little bit better, I could see it. So anyways, this is Bird Brain. Hope you guys enjoyed being nerdy today. Fly, Eagles, fly. See you around.